My name is Sraddhalu Ranade from the Sri Aurobindo Ashram, and I have been working in the field of science as well as a little in education. But the approach that I grew up into naturally was to connect to science not so much as a field of study, but as a field of experience. And in a sense, therefore, I have never felt the distinction between science and spirituality. All I can say is the sense of continuity has deepened, widened, and become more complexly rich as time has developed. And my quest has been instinctively from an early stage to experiencing and understanding the completeness of reality. And in that, both science and spirituality are simultaneous teachers. It is about this that I wish to speak today, and I think I made a serious error of taking a theme which demands much more time than 15 minutes. So, whatever I will present will be somewhat uh, hasty and only general and indicative of a line of possibility of study and discovery that Sri Aurobindo presents for us. This term ultimate theory of everything is a term used in the field of science to describe what science aims at in its ideal, which is to find something so essential, so fundamental, so unitary, that out of that singularity, the entire cosmos and all the laws of physics and all the processes, particles, experiences that unfold, forces, all would emerge natural as a natural outcome of that single one equation, insight or knowledge. And that's what we aim at in an ultimate theory of everything. What has happened though in practice, as science has approached this absolute that mind conceives of, it has found that it cannot be captured by a single perspective, but it ends up with multiple perspectives, and these perspectives are not harmonious between themselves. There was what was called classical physics, replaced by relativistic physics, replaced by quantum mechanics, and now superstring theories and various other fanciful theories which have very little grounding in reality but are merely mathematical speculations. But all of them capture some aspect of the reality, and among themselves they do not have a sense of continuity. There are sharp distinctions and even contradictions. Sometimes even within a single theory, there is a contradiction. When I look at what Sri Aurobindo offers us in his writings, some of his major works, some of his lesser known works, including his commentaries on the Veda and the Upanishads, in all, he presents a very rich, comprehensive, complete perspective, understanding, even experience of the cosmos, so complete, so rational, so internally self-consistent, so externally accurate, so logical, that you cannot but call it an ultimate theory of everything. The only difficulty is of the context. His ultimate theory of everything, or even ultimate experience of everything more accurately, is not limited to the physical world, not just physics, but includes domains of reality which go well beyond the physical, of which the physical appears only a very superficial, limited portion. In fact, in this larger perspective, we realize why science cannot get to that ultimate theory of everything. Because the physical world is not the only reality. It subsists by a higher level of reality, which itself subsists by a still higher level of reality. And therefore, its full understanding needs this comprehensive perspective. We might even say, therefore, that what Sri Aurobindo leaves us is the framework into which science will tend to grow inevitably as it pursues this quest for an ultimate theory. Nevertheless, we still end up with a practical problem because what Sri Aurobindo offers does not enter the domain of equations of conventional physics. Therefore, it still can be set aside and separated from science as philosophy or metaphysics. In my own pursuit of this study, I have found that this division is artificial. Sri Aurobindo does go deep into the very processes of matter, describing how matter originates and what are the principles by which it unfolds and evolves and develops all the phenomena which science studies. And in that sense, he has already given us the fundamental principles by which we can understand matter, although they connect naturally to life, mind, and supermind. And so I do not see this sharp division, and I have worked particularly in trying to articulate this continuity in terms that the modern scientist can understand. I found there that there has been an unfortunate historical accident taking place about 100 years ago, in which a critical element which would bridge these two was removed from conventional science. And this critical element is what used to be known earlier as an ether. All of modern science, going back a few centuries, was based on a presupposition of a fundamental substratum out of which the phenomenal universe emerges. It was described as an ether, and you'll be surprised to know that much of present understanding of science covering magnetism, electromagnetism, electricity, static and dynamic electrical phenomena were all understood and their equations developed on the presumption of such an ether. Maxwell's famous equations, which are still used today as equations but no more explained, were explained in terms of an ether and were developed out of an ether supposition. But when about 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago, Michelson Morley did a famous experiment to detect the ether, we are popularly taught that they found a null result. They couldn't detect it. Einstein then came and declared, let's assume ether doesn't exist, and came up with special relativity. And from that point on, ether was as if eliminated from science. In fact, Michelson-Morley's experiment did detect an ether. And this is not commonly known. It did detect, it was looking for a fluctuation of speed of light. It did detect a fluctuation of speed of light, but what it detected was 1/3 of what should have been or what was expected, and therefore they considered that a null result. But this was because they assumed the ether to be a static space in which Earth moves and did not take into account that ether itself was fluid and would be dragged along by the Earth, and so results of ether speed would be lower when measured at ground level or underground as they did. The same experiments were taken by Michelson again about 20 years later. He continued to refine the experiments, and this time when he conducted it at the top of a mountain, he found light speed variations up to 12 kilometers per second. Independent of him, another scientist called Dayton Miller spent several years making multiple measurements daily and detected a consistent pattern of light speed variation which indicated an ether flow through the universe in a particular direction, very specific. These results were shown to Einstein, who commented, if this is proved right, then we will have to reject the existing theory of relativity. Unfortunately, there were certain politics in science. Dayton Miller's results were suppressed, and ether continued to be shunned. Although interestingly, Einstein himself came back to a description of an ether in his general theory of relativity, where he discusses space-time distortion and spinning matter dragging space-time with it, which are all descriptions of a fluid flow, which is a substratum and the basis for electromagnetic waves and light. And he himself concluded his description of this substratum by saying, in that sense, we come back to the concept of an ether, but now differently stated. And so Einstein actually ended up accepting an ether, but meanwhile, modern science had thrown out this term. And still today in our textbooks, we describe an atom as a nucleus, an electron, an empty space in between, when in fact what exists in between is a tremendous amount of energy seething in continuous fluctuations, which are described today in quantum electrodynamics as zero point energy or virtual particle fluctuations, etc. But in this perspective, we find a continuity of a substance which is seething with energy, of which a very little emerging, stabilizing creates this phenomenal floating world on top of a sea of this fluctuating energy, which is enormously greater than anything that we find in actual energy terms in the appearing matter. It is here that we find the linking principle between all that Sri Aurobindo presents and the raw physical science of today. By bringing ether back, the two get joined. Not only that, surprisingly, when we explore the various theories emerging out of this recognition of an ether, and particularly here I refer to one of the most outstanding theories, little known, by somebody called Harold Aspden, a British scientist who I had the privilege to meet just a few days ago. He is the only scientist who actually, through a starting principle of an ether, is able to derive mathematically by laws of physics certain critical constants of the cosmos, which are only measured and never understood. In particular, I refer here to the ratio of the charge and mass of an electron, the gravitational constant, the Hubble constant, and the fine structure constant of quantum mechanics. A theory beginning from just an assumption of an ether, actually calculating the values of these constants purely out of a logical chain of development, which conventional science does not know why they are what they are and cannot even predict them. It can only measure them. This, to me, represents material worthy of a Nobel Prize, but he will remain in ignominy because he speaks of an ether and rejects Einstein's special relativity. Well, in practical terms, what this offers us is a development of science which involves a reconciliation of all the forces and all the apparent divisions between the perspectives of science are harmonized, and we end up with what can be called the closest to an ultimate theory of everything so far developed. But interestingly, and this is the point which connects to Sri Aurobindo, his basic assumptions of what the ether is and its properties meet exactly the descriptions that Sri Aurobindo offers to us in his Life Divine, in his commentary on the Upanishads, etc. And this is the critical bridge that I find, by accepting which we find not only the continuity of all of Sri Aurobindo's cosmic theory of everything to the most material physics of today in an ultimate theory of everything. And in so doing, we find also that the physical ether, Sri Aurobindo relates to a subtle ether, which he relates also to a still more subtle, essential, supramental essence. And in so doing, he bridges the raw material physics with occult sciences and the spiritual sciences. And in this medium of an ether, we therefore find a reconciliation of these three different domains and a continuity of a complete science which is possible for us to understand and even experience. So this is in a quick summary, a very complex and a very wide perspective of what Sri Aurobindo has gifted to us, which we need to explore, develop, articulate, share with the world, and perhaps even these insights lead to technological possibilities that must be developed, if not here, even elsewhere in the world. Thank you.
I've been asked to introduce myself. In a nutshell, I'm a child who has found his home and is very happy about it. So I'm a psychologist by choice and profession, and a poet and philosopher by temperament and predilection. And that's about it. Coming to the issue of science, where parallel lines meet, of course, given the theme of the subject, we are speaking right now about science and spirituality, where these two lines meet. And we start with a little bit of a little poem from Sraddhalu Ranade's one of the magnificent many poems, A Vision of Science, where he speaks of the background is that religion has been thrown aside by science, and science is holding the earth mesmerized. And then religion, while it's passing away, it tells to science, thou thinkest term and end for thee are not. But though thy pride is great, thou hast forgot these things that waits for thee beside the way. All questions thou mayest answer but one day. Her question shall await thee, that reply, for they who cannot die. She slays them, and their mangled bodies lie upon the highways of eternity. Therefore, if thou wouldst conquer, answer first this one thing: who art thou in this dungeon laboring? I think this sets the problem and the solution very beautifully. One of the basic problems of all of us, leave aside philosophy, is even in philosophy, why there is something instead of nothing in this universe. And in philosophical terms, it can be resolved into two fundamental questions. The first mystery of life is not death, it is birth. And this problem can be put philosophically as there are three things. If we understand them, we will understand the whole cosmos. One is existence. The second is consciousness. And the third is the relation between the two. That's about all. If we understand these three things, we understand everything. Because there is a way science tries to understand existence, and it tries to make existence or objects separate from itself. It's something objective. And another way to understand existence is by understanding the subjective self, the sense of the self. How does existence, this totality, experience itself? So there is a point where these two meet, and that's the point one has to discover. So this is about existence. The second is consciousness, and this is a big debate going on in the field of science. And one can say 10 years back, when I used to take some interest in these debates, the balance was 50-50. Scientists were hotly debating whether consciousness is prima facie a fundamental fact of existence, or it is something like a byproduct of neuronal babbles. So this was the debate going on. I don't know what is the current situation, but it was, scientifically and mathematically and rationally, it was tilted equal in favor of each other. So if consciousness is a byproduct of neurons, then all our discussion collapses. Then what I am talking is nothing but my neurons ticking, and it has no validity, because after all, they are just neurons. They can really do nothing much, and we should not really be listening to each other and trying to understand each other, because ultimately it's nothing but matter, and dust under dust, unto dust to lie, sans song, sans wine, sans singer, sans end. This, of course, Omar Khayyam in his beautiful Rubaiyat. So this is one of the issues, that is consciousness primary? Not even energy, not even consciousness, is there a being? This is another enigma, another point of departure between science and spiritual seeking. Science engages with reality with only a small little part, and that part is the physical mind. Of course, we make much about it, and we rely heavily on it. In fact, Sri Aurobindo says there are three lines along which human beings have sought reality. One, the line of science, which is primarily the physical mind, which depends heavily upon the data of the senses. Now the problem is that we are discovering scientifically that this data of the senses is a very imperfect data. And if we really rely heavily on it, it will be very difficult for, let's say, the organizers of this beautiful conference, that at the end of it, there is a tea, and if somebody were to ask, are you really hungry? And if he said yes, and the person asks, prove it, will be really very difficult. So, that's where subjective knowledge comes in. We accept as a fact of common experience that hunger is a fact. Or I get angry, it's a fact. It need not manifest in outward signs. So that's the subjective side of reality. So physical mind tries to understand reality purely on the basis of the data of the senses, its instrument reason. And that's what science is, leaving aside its philosophical connotation where it actually steps beyond its field. The second approach towards reality is, of course, philosophy. Philosophy is the approach of the intellectual mind, which sometimes picks up data and sometimes goes on its own and tries to search for meaning and tries to look for rational links in this universe. But what if there is no rational link? What if the universe is simply an unfolding of the great delight, waves after waves of delight unfolding itself? We presume that there must be rational links within the universe, and rational the way we understand reason based on a limited data. The third approach towards the reality has been the approach of the dynamic spiritualizing mind, and that is religion. And all these three have given us partial glimpses, partial aspects of reality. One has led us to identifying with the so-called impersonality or the universal energy behind all seeming separate objects. The other one has led us to discover the being who stands behind all existence. A third one has led us to create a sense of abstraction, something that exists, but we don't know, we can neither define it nor understand it. Now, it's very difficult if science doesn't evolve or this search doesn't evolve to really find a meeting point. Science, as we said, takes a very limited instrument, and the instrument is limited by its very nature. So if our physical mind remains what it is, if our senses remain what they are, then there is very little that we can really do in terms of understanding reality. Of course, we find certain meeting points. For instance, we discover an impersonality and universality, but that's not what is the impersonality and universality which is behind the cosmos. It's not that. It's simply because the whole universe is built on a single plan. So what we discover at one plane is also found at another plane. Well, the atom is like a galaxy, and a galaxy is like the cosmos, and everything around is around a divine center. That's simply because the whole universe is built upon a single plan. But this cannot be extrapolated onto the other. So this is one of the problems. Whereas spirituality, leaving aside the different paths, engages with the reality with the whole being, and therefore I find it something much more complete and satisfying. Science, for the search of reality, cuts off emotion, cuts off will, or uses it in only a small way, cuts off all other layers of the mind and isolates a small part, that part which is heavily dependent on the senses. Whereas spirituality engages it because it starts with this basic experience that reality is total. So being stands behind this entire play. There is a infinite personality of the Godhead who stands behind this brute machine. And that is the beauty of this journey, the spiritual journey. So how are they going to meet? Not so long as we remain caged in the limits of the mind. If we remain at the level of the mind, then we have to say what is there in Savitri. If mind is all, renounce the hope. Because really, if mind is ultimate, then we cannot really reconcile. But if there is a consciousness beyond the mind, then we have to ascend there. And then the whole view will change. The entire paradigm, we talk about all these paradigms based on a little view. We can take a small example. I see the clock ticking, so I'm just rushing, suppressing all instinct for stories, etc. But nevertheless, no, that's fine. That's fine, thank you. So nevertheless, it's supposing all the things that are hidden from a physical view. We know that senses, the physical senses register only a small, limited amount of what we call as reality. And so do the ears. Supposing all this reality were to burst upon us simultaneously, what would be our experience? Probably the whole scientific paradigm will change. What is the science of the crow? Even a crow uses a science. In fact, it's the prototype of the scientist who puts stone inside a pitcher and makes the water come up. Every day I had to watch that little thing in front of the nursing home. Thank God it's gone. But it was a reminder that, look, he's a scientist. So there is nothing great in being a scientist. We need to do something better than a crow. We have a whole mass of data inside us which we ignore. This inner world is teeming with infinite forces, energies, clash of beings, forces, and consciousnesses, different domains of existence. It's such a wonderful universes which we need to explore. And only when we have done it, and then we return our gaze onto this world of matter and life and mind, that we will discover the true meaning of all this and the true science. That's why in ancient Indian traditions we had two kinds of science or vidya. One is called as avidya by its very nature. It's a science of the ignorance. Mother puts it in the same volume, Thoughts and Aphorism, that what we call as science is science of appearances. We study appearances, try to understand the processes, and fine, I mean, it's good, but nothing great about it. You may understand everything about a car, but it gives no meaning. Who is driving it? Who created it? Where is it going? All these things are relevant to the human quest. It's not enough just to understand the car and its dynamics. So this is avidya. It's an ignorant science, or if you like, it is called aparavidya, the lower vidya. And there is paravidya, the science of the spirit. And for that, to pass from avidya to paravidya, it makes a logical sense that if we really have to pass to the beyond, and if the beyond is something that far exceeds our limited intelligence and our limited cognition and our limited senses, then there is but one way. And the way is to make a whole scale surrender. Surrender of the questing mind. So let me end with a small little story and then just few lines of Savitri, for sure, 3 minutes. Story is from the Ramayana. It's about a little crow who wants to understand who is this fellow sitting along with his brother and his wife in the jungle, Rama, story Rama. So this crow, he's the younger brother of Indra. It is a very symbolic story, but I'll not go into all the details. So he comes and wants to test that people say he's divine. Is it really true? So he pecks at the feet of Sita. And Rama is quiet, but Lakshmana can't take it. So he, puts an arrow on the bow and, goes behind Jayant. Jayant runs because, he is, after all, child of Indra and he can really fly very fast. But as he goes, wherever he goes, he finds the arrow following him. He goes to one god after another, but all of them say, look, this arrow, I have no choice. And eventually, finally, he is given a very wise counsel. Why don't you do a very simple thing? This arrow has been let loose from there. Go back, surrender yourself at the feet, and you will find all your answers and the arrow will be returned back. So after the entire journey, he comes back and surrenders himself at the feet of Sita, who is none other but divinized earth nature, which is a possibility of the future. And he surrenders himself and escapes the entire journey. So this is how science is proceeding. It will go to the limits of avidya or aparavidya. But to go to paravidya, it has to shed that mortal attire and enter and pass through the doors by the grace of the divine. And this, for that, we have to turn our gaze inward. So long as we are outward gazing, however far we may go, we'll miss that meeting point. Let me quickly conclude with this line. An inconclusive play is reason's toil. This is from Savitri. And so long as we base ourselves on reason, we cannot really find that meeting point. We have to transcend it. We have to be yogins, actually, in short, to really find the meeting between spiritual experience. So far, the mind experiences the spirit. It cannot reconcile spirituality and science. We have to ascend beyond the mind. An inconclusive play is reason's toil. Each strong idea can use her as its tool. Accepting every brief, she pleads her case. Open to every thought she cannot know. The eternal advocate, seated as judge, armors in logic's invulnerable mail, 1,000 combatants for truth's veiled throne, and sets on a high horseback of argument to tilt forever with a wordy lance. So this is full of humor, actually, this whole passage. A bullock yoked in the cart of proven fact, She drags huge knowledge bales through matter's dust to reach utility's immense bazaar. As if Savitri is full of humor actually. It's not difficult. As if she knew not facts are husks of truth. The husks she keeps, the kernel throws aside. An ancient wisdom fades into the past. The age's faith becomes an idle tale. God passes out of the awakened thought, and old discarded dream needed no more. Not only ether, we have done away even with God. Old wives' tale. Only she seeks mechanic nature's keys. Our thoughts are parts of the immense machine, our ponderings but a freak of matter's law. The mystic's lore was a fancy or a blind of soul or spirit. We have now no need. Matter is the admirable reality, the patent, unescapable miracle, the hard truth of things, simple, eternal soul. This is what we have reached this point already, but we have to go still further. In fact, we have reached one more step ahead. One chance remained that here might be a power to liberate man from the old inadequate means, this about the nuclear energy, and leave him sovereign of the earthly scene. For reason then might grasp the original force to drive her car upon the roads of time. All then might serve the need of the thinking race. An absolute state found orders absolute. Well, this goes on. And finally, these last four lines. So might it be if the spirit fell asleep. Thank God, the paradigms are breaking. And man is learning to not to be mesmerized by science. We are dehypnotizing ourselves. Man then might rest content and live in peace. Master of nature who once her bondslave worked. If life's dire heart arose not in revolt, this is where science misses out. The quest for a total truth. If God within could find no greater plan, but many visaged is the cosmic soul. A touch can alter the fixed front of fate. A sudden turn can come, a road appear. A greater mind may see a greater truth. That's what is the essence. Or we may find, when all the rest has failed, hid in ourselves the key to perfect change. So science and spirituality parted ways from the consciousness of man, went in two seemingly opposite directions. They have returned back to man, and within man is the meeting point. From man, the mental being, to man, the psychicized being, to man, the spiritual and the supramental being, is the way to reconcile science and spirituality. Thank you.